What's up guys, I'm Davinator1212 and today we're going to do something a little different. I normally over at my channel like to do deck discussions and deck profiles and different cards and things, but today I'm going to do an archetype discussion on Kaijus in a segment I want to call, Let Them Fight! A quick guide to Kaijus. The reason why I want to talk Kaijus today is I believe they're an underutilized archetype. They all have a very specific mechanic which lets them tribute your opponent's monster to summon it to their side of the field as an inherent special summon. This is an extremely powerful mechanic. It's almost unstoppable and lets you get rid of pretty much every monster in the game, including things like Dark Destroyer and Cyber Dragon Infinity, cards that would otherwise pose a problem for a lot of decks. However, giving your opponent a powerful giant monster is less than ideal, so what I want to talk about today is what can we do with the deck and what can we mix it with in order to get over this kind of clumsy mechanic and still use the tribute mechanic to our advantage. Alright guys, let's get started. The first build I want to talk about is a ritual build, Relinquished. Yeah, Relinquished, man. What's up, homie? I miss this card so much. He is so cool. Basically, what he does is every single turn he can target one of your opponent's monsters, absorb it as an equipped spell, his stats become the stats of the equipped monster, and if he would be killed by battle, the equipped card is killed instead, and we each take battle damage, not just you. This is a really fun little card. He was one of Pegasus's, star players, so that's really cool. And he's perfect to balance out the problem with Kaiju, which basically means you just keep throwing Kaijus at your opponent as long as you can keep absorbing the Kaiju you throw at them. And with cards like Pre-Preparation of Rites coming out, old school ritual decks are going to get a huge boost in consistency. And frankly, this was probably my first build of Kaijus. I think on my channel it is the first build I ever posted of Kaijus. I really like this one and it's a lot of fun. But with the strengths of absorbing a Kaiju with Relinquished comes some weaknesses that we should probably discuss. Number one, ritual monsters are extremely slow, especially old school ritual monsters. It requires like 4 pieces. You need the ritual spell, the ritual monster, some tribute fodder, and actually a Kaiju to throw at your opponent so that you're absorbing something that you want to absorb. But all in all, the two mechanics definitely have tons of synergy. Now, how about a couple of tech cards you can use in this build in order to give it a power boost? Besides Relinquished himself being the coolest card in the game, let's be real here, another cool card you can use is Secret Village of the Spellcasters. He is a spellcaster after all, and being that he can only protect himself via battle, you probably need some way of defending him other than that. And something like Regeki is a great way to get rid of him, so yeah, something that blocks out your opponent's spells will help you protect your Relinquished. Another card you guys can try out is Scrubbed Raid. It's an oldie, but a goodie. Basically, it's a continuous trap that during every one of your opponent's battle phases, you can destroy one of your cards in order to end their battle phase, which means you can protect your Relinquished completely from battle, not just the one attack he can absorb with the equipped spell, and you can destroy the equipped monster equipped to him so that you can absorb another one next turn. And best part about it is, it locks your opponent out of battle, and you don't even go minus because you're destroying their card essentially, not your own. And the last tech card for the Relinquished build is probably one of my favorites, Jin, Demolisher of Rituals. What this guy does is essentially if he's used as tribute for the ritual summon of Relinquished, Relinquished can no longer be targeted by your opponent's card effects. Damn, that makes your opponent have a really hard time getting rid of your 3000 attack power Relinquished that is immune to at least one attack. Overall, not the most competitive build of the deck, and like I said, my first attempt at it. However, it's a lot of fun unless you play an ancient card like Relinquished that it's just still really cool. The next variant of the deck I'd like to discuss really quickly is Kaiju shouldall. Now, before you click off the video, you think I'm stupid or whatever, hear me out. Shoudalls are a very toolboxy engine. That's what they do. They can pop a monster, they can pop a spell, they can draw you cards, they can summon something from the grave. That one's a tuner. They can do quite a bit of cool crap. They're a very interesting toolboxy main deck engine. That's probably why they've been a very good deck since they came out in Duelist Alliance. The Kaijus are great at getting rid of problem monsters, and they are also a mess of different attributes, which means with your Shouldall fusion cards, you can summon any of the Shouldall fusion monsters. Except Construct, but there's no Light Kaiju and she's banned, so that's kind of a moot point. So you have access to Gristia and Shekanaga, which are both very powerful, as well as Winda, who's still a decent floodgate. And you don't have to do anything weird like run the other trap. What's it called? Shouldall core or something? I don't remember what it's called. Whatever. The one that can change its attribute. You don't have to do that. However, despite the fact that on paper this deck seems like it would work really well, there are, again, some setbacks that you as a deck builder are going to have to try to get teased out of the deck. First off, El Shouldall Fusion was limited and Shouldall Contract was banned outright, which kind of limits the power of the deck and it gives it a lack of a power play. Also, both engines can be rather large, so a room for random tech might be a problem. However, if you're an excellent pilot of both Shouldalls and the Kaijus, you might be able to tease out a pretty powerful deck. Some fun tech that you could actually use in this deck would be, again, your Secret Village of the Spellcasters. You actually have more Spellcasters this time around, which means that this thing will probably never hurt you at all. You can summon various cool Synchro monsters, because again, Falco is a tuner. Something like Arknight Magician, which can pop Pendulum Scales, which is actually pretty powerful right now. Clearwing Synchro Dragon, which can defend your Kaijus. And because you have level 8s that you can just slap down, and Falco is a level 2 tuner, you can make Leo really, really easily. So overall, this is another fun build of the deck you could Terra Locals up with, but if you're a good pilot of both Kaijus, and especially the Shoudalls, you might be able to make a halfway decent competitive deck out of this. The next variant of the deck that I would like to discuss with you guys and get some input on is Kai Senju, or Kaiju Senju. This is a very interesting build of the deck, and as one of the early players of this deck, I can attest to how good the thing actually is. The biggest strength of this deck, however, is the abuse of the Kaiju's own summoning mechanic. It relies a lot less on the effects of every individual Kaiju and more on the fact that you're just tributing your opponent's Kaijus away. Basically, by tributing in a problem monster, giving them a Kaiju, and then using your Kama-1 to bounce that monster back to your hand. Because you are the owner of the Kaiju, bouncing a Kaiju goes back to your hand, not your opponent's, which basically lets you use that Kaiju every single turn to remove a monster. And if you have more than one Kama-1 in hand, you go Kama-1, Kama-2, Kama-1 or something, you can bounce the Kaiju twice, tributing 2 monsters. This is very useful, again, for a bunch of decks like Magispectors, which Senju would have an awful matchup against otherwise, not being able to bounce any of their monsters. Another thing is, because they run Senjus, you can use Floodgates in this deck. Floodgates are always good, say what you will about them, Senju run them like champs. Being that they pretty much all normal summon each other in a little daisy chain, it also doesn't interfere with your Kaiju special summoning mechanic that turn. Also, if your Kaiju engine just isn't working for some reason, a very simple Senju engine is still a competent engine to run a duel on. Having a couple of Kama-1s and a Kama-2 or a Kama-3 and a couple of their trap cards set, you're golden. You can still put up a decent fight. So the engine works on its own without having the Kaiju engine to be there to support it. Its weakness is essentially things like OG Trap Hole and anything that would stop the first Senju summon. Because they have to daisy chain, if you stop the first one, you stop everyone after that, which is a big problem for the deck. So like something like Breakthrough Skill can really stunt the mechanic. But ignoring all that, the deck still functions very, very well. And there's tons of fun tech cards you can use for this deck. The one I personally like to talk about is Summoning Curse. This card is like super trolly. Basically, it's a continuous spell, and what it does is every time a monster is special summoned, the controller of the special summoned monster has to banish 1 card from their hand. Because you're throwing Kaijus at your opponent, they're the controller of the special summoned monster, so they need to banish a card from their hand. And because you're bouncing the Kaiju repetitively every single time you use Kama-1, you're banishing several cards from their hand a turn, at the cost of 500 life points during your end phase to keep this thing activated. So if bouncing cards to your opponent's hand are really your thing to abuse a card like Summoning Curse, things like Storming Mirror Force can also be very powerful in this build. Having your Kaiju sent to the graveyard is a little less than ideal. Keeping them in your hand lets them be used for things like trade-in, for draw power, or to tribute over another opponent's monster that might be a problem later on. Another card that works surprisingly well in this kind of build is Lose One Turn. Oh boy, does this card work great. Your Senjus are pretty much all but unaffected by this card, and honestly, the one Kaiju you want on your side of the field is Gamacell, the Sea Turtle Kaiju, in defense mode. So what you do is, you give your opponent Dagoron, who goes to defense mode with 1200 defense, and you give yourself Gamacell, who goes to defense mode with 3000, and then next turn his effect is live, meaning you can negate anything your opponent does on his turn to start. This lets you set up Gamacell in defense mode. This card is great. Then there's other cards you can use that kind of let you abuse this mechanic, like Neospatian Grand Mole, just to, in case, you give your opponent a stupid Kaiju, you have no other way to get rid of it, so you just crash Grand Mole into it. Get them both back to your hand. Overall, this is a competitive build of Kaijus. It's very, very powerful, with a very good pilot and a very good build. You can do some serious damage, and one of my personal favorites. Alright guys, and this is the last one I'd like to discuss today, Gradle Kaijus, probably the most competitive and popular variant of the deck to date. The biggest advantage to Gradle Kaijus are, number one, it fills your Kaiju counters on your waterfront very quickly. Some of the other builds, especially the Kaiju Senju build, which bounces lots of cards, tends to not get a lot of Kaiju counters to use for your Kaiju effects. But obviously, the big elephant in the room for this deck is Gradles steal opponents' monsters. Basically what you're supposed to do is you give your opponent a Kaiju, and then you somehow kill one of your own Gradles and steal the Kaiju back. It's an extremely simple mechanic, and it does exactly what our relinquished build set out to do, but it's probably a little more consistent and a little more streamlined. Not to mention the spot removal in this deck is fairly decent. Between Impact, Split, Gradle Dragon, and all the Kaijus, you are either stealing or blowing something up. So your opponent is not going to have very many cards on their side of the field at any given time. Not to mention, the biggest advantage is probably that it keeps card advantage extremely well. Waterfront and Impact let you get a Kaiju and a Gradle every single turn. Not to mention, anytime when one of yours are killed, you're probably using Supply Unit to actually get cards, so every time you lose one, you draw one. Now, again, there are some disadvantages to this deck like any other one. Non-targetable monsters are still a problem, especially for the Gradle engine. Magispectors, Dark Destroyer, all those cards are very hard to deal with if you don't see your Kaiju section. The Kaijus, again, are great for getting rid of cards like that, but if, let's say, you don't open very well and all you have are a bunch of Gradles, you're going to have a hard time getting rid of something like a Magispector Raccoon. Obviously, something like Macrocosmos or Dark Law is going to screw this deck up pretty thoroughly because it loses its main way of stealing Kaiju back. And something like Armatis that can just blow through a set Gradle Alligator or something is going to be a big problem for the deck as well. And it does predominantly rely on its battle phase to do most of its Graydalling. So that can be an inherently slow mechanic, because if your opponent doesn't ever really enter their battle phase because they find ways of getting rid of your monsters in main phase 1 all the time, you're going to have a little bit of a problem dealing with that. Now there are some fun tech cards you guys can use with this build of the deck. One that you guys should probably try is Debris Dragon. Debris Dragon's a fun little tuner that lets you get at your level 7 synchros extremely easily. So things like Moonlight and Clearwing Synchro Dragon are very easy to get to, and both of those can really help protect a Kaiju-infused board. As I mentioned before, Supply Unit is going to draw you tons of cards. Every time one of your Greydolls is destroyed, you're drawing a card. And, frankly, your opponent's going to be hard-pressed to waste his spell trap removal on Supply Unit when you have Floodgates you're running in this deck, like Skill Drain. Skill Drain is very powerful in this deck because all the Greydolls activate in the grave, so they don't care about Skill Drain, and frankly, who cares if your Kaijus are completely neutered? That means you have more options to give your opponent Gamacell in attack mode, which is the weakest one in attack mode, and not have to worry about your opponent just negating everything. And the last one that you guys should probably run on the deck is Oasis of Dragon Souls. This fun little trap card lets you summon any monster from your graveyard to defense mode and change to a worm, but who really cares? It's just Call the Haunted for defense, which lets you essentially block an attack with one of your Greydolls, which is a great move, because then you can steal whatever was going to swing at your life points, if it intends to keep attacking, or lets you get Gamacell back in defense mode, which is, again, a very powerful move for Kaijus, because Gamacell can spend 2 counters to gate anything. Overall, this is probably the best build of the deck from a consistency standpoint, as well as probably being the cheapest build. All these cards are commons and rares. So, like, yeah, this thing is a very, very inexpensive, competitive build of the deck, and honestly, it's probably the easiest to play, because it really doesn't care what your opponent's doing. It's either set your monsters or crash into them and steal their opponent's monsters, and if it's something you can't steal, give them a Kaiju so it is something you can steal. It's a very easy build of the deck to play. Alright guys, I hope you enjoyed my guide to Kaijus. I love this archetype, it's so much fun. It reminds me of like my mom taking me to the grocery store when I was this little kid and renting like Godzilla vs. Mothra and stuff. I still remember that, it was so much fun. But let me know down in the comments below what you think of my deck ideas and different variants that I proposed, as well as some of your own variants, because this is kind of a splashable engine. Hell, if you just run the level 8s, you can use Trading as a draw engine and just kind of call it a day. So yeah, if you guys have any ideas for this thing, just let me know in the comments below. And remember guys, if you don't troll the meta, who will? I'll see you guys next time.